Hey, welcome back to Full Time, presented by Amazon Business. Or should I say bon dia? My name is Tamerra, and the reason why I say that is because this week on the show, we are talking about World Sevens football, the revolutionary Grand Slam style tournament that took place just this past weekend in Portugal. Huge prize money. I don't know if you caught it, but it was a major vibe. And to unpack all of that, we are going to be joined by U.S. Women's National Team legend Tobin Heath, who was deeply involved in the organization of all this on the Player Advisory Council, and the Athletics' Charlotte Harpur, who had the enviable task of covering the event on the ground. I have to, of course, introduce my co-host, though, to do all of this, Meg Linehan. Meg, how are you doing?
I'm good. The sunshine is back in Vermont. So, you know, at the end of the day, are we all houseplants? Maybe. Yes.
It's always so humbling and reassuring to know that sometimes all you need is a little sun. It's like, is it really this simple? Yes, it
can
is.
be. It can be, you know. But I feel like, you know, we had so much soccer. It was just like a World Sevens, Champions League final.
Oh my God.
Just everything
NWSL.
happening. NWSL. Yeah, just buffeted by soccer.
Truly. Between the soccer, the sunshine, the barbecue, we are entering that time of the year, and I am so pumped. So much to look forward to this summer. But back to World Sevens football. I think, Meg, we need to give the people a bit of an explainer to just get them prepped, because this tournament sort of snuck up on everyone. It was sort of in the lead up to Champions League, which everyone was of course channeling their energy toward. But this was a very different kind of tournament. And so if you weren't aware, let's give you a few of the nuts and bolts of how it worked.
Yeah, it is definitely interesting. Obviously, it's a 7-a-side tournament, and the rules very loose. Like, that was the real vibe of this tournament. Very loose, like rolling subs, music during the games. Like, yes. Basically, you took everything. No offside. Like, yeah, it was very much a vibe. Launched in 2025 as this new 7-a-side competition. They are intending it to be sort of a Grand Slam functioning thing. Despite the World Sevens name, it was 8 European teams, the world of Europe, but including, you know, the 2 finalists, Bayern Munich and Manchester United, plus Manchester City, PSG, Benfica, Ajax, Roma, Rosengard, like, you know, kind of a who's who of top European teams. We will get into that, though, as well. And yeah, I mean, they basically set it up down the road from Lisbon, leading into the Champions Cup, into the UWCL, just so that way they could hopefully pull some people down. Attendance was a little iffy in that first day, but you could see it growing and growing as I think the vibe kind of spread. But yeah, I think that's at least the soccer part of it. We can also talk about the business part of it, Tamerra.
Yeah, for sure. The U.S.-based philanthropist Jennifer Mackesy was a minority owner in Chelsea and Gotham, is a minority owner in both of those clubs. She put up a lot of money behind this tournament. And I think one of the biggest draws had to be for the players to be involved was the prize money, because we're talking $5 million for a 3-day tournament.
I would love that kind of payday. I don't know about you, but like, where's the like write a whole bunch of articles in 3 days for $5 million?
Like, please, if you need to know how to spell my name for the grand, just hit me up, because I will have you covered. Yes, and half of that going to the winning club, 50% of that going straight to the 14 players who were on the winning team. And I'm just thinking about the girls, especially because these are all European teams. These girls are all about to go on vacation. I mean, for a bit, those who aren't competing in the Euros. And so I can imagine some of them being like, well, I'm about to upgrade my flights to first class, you know? Like, I love that for them. So yes, the business side of it is huge. We're going to be talking to Tobin about that as well, because there is a huge focus on what it means to grow this tournament after its inaugural season that we're going to have to get to as well. But before we do, as always, I have to make sure that you guys are following us on all of the socials at TA Fulltime. We're growing across every platform: YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Blue Sky. We want to make sure that you guys are covered, not just in the conversations that we have on our podcast, but extra things, interviews with players, explainers that we're posting on Instagram. Please make sure that you're following us. And of course, there's always the free newsletter as well. We are posting our work there all the time. We invite you to join us so that by the time you come here, you're primed, you're prepped for the chaos. So make sure that you're doing that too. All right, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, more World Sevens talk.
All right, we are now joined by Tobin Heath, friend of the show. We already had you on once. We're so excited to have you back because we got to talk about World Sevens. We want to hear, look, what was your whirlwind Europe trip like, Tobin?
Friend of the show, I love that. Love being a friend of the show. Oh man, I feel like I'm coming off a high. I actually still don't have a voice from it, so I think that says a lot. What an incredibly successful event. First off, I think we're chomping at the bits for it to happen again, and yeah, I'm just blown away by everything that we kind of dreamed up and we went after to do just organically happened even better, And I feel like there's few things in life that I felt like that where the actual reality was almost better than the dream, because now things are so forced, you kind of have to pay people to feel a certain way or pay people to say something, and this just felt I don't know, it was awesome.
High praise. And it really aligns with what you've been saying throughout this tournament, Tobin, about the importance of getting back to the point of this game, which is the joy. And to hear you talk about how organically this came together, I mean, for those of us who were not there, I think the purity of that joy was still palpable, even though we were following on social. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about the joy factor, essentially. Where do you think it came from? Was it the fact that this was a new tournament? Were people already kind of emotionally pre-gaming for Champions League on Saturday? Where do you think the joy was cultivated, and how do you plan to sort of harness that as this tournament continues to grow?
Yeah, I think the joy started with the vision of the tournament. So I'm just I'm super lucky to be part of this founding group, and I chaired the player advisory council, so a lot of it was curating the group of players that was going to kind of bring this to life from a player's experience, on field, off field, what's going through the minds of these players at this time in the calendar, at this time in their careers, what are they needed, and it's never started like that, ever. In all of the experiences, in everything that's been built around women's football, the player's voice, it's just been completely excluded from the process. And that was the first thing that was included in the process. How do we make this event a success? And obviously, the format, it was a dream format, right? I actually was sharing with Kristen, because I've just been debriefing on this so much, and I was sharing with Kristen last night that it's kind of a full arc of how I would have wanted my football career to go. Obviously, it got cut short, but what I really I started off like this. Everything that the tournament was about was this feeling of joy, of friendship, of football, of a deep love of football, and that's how that was the beginning of football for me. And then, everything gets so serious, so fast, so competitive, just so professional. And I lived this really strong arc to the point where we're playing in this 2019 World Cup, and we're literally championing equal pay at the same time. We're in a lawsuit. These are really big, heavy, serious stuff. And I feel football became so massive, to the point where it almost felt it lost a lot of those pieces of it, right? And I'm really proud of being able to do those types of things, but I would have loved that full arc of coming back to football, coming back to the original feeling of playing. And I was almost emotional because I was reminded of it, again. And to help create that was a really special experience. And to get to kind of what your question was, it was actually from the very beginning. We had an opening party that not many people saw, where all the teams came together the night before the tournament. And we were asked about everything, how everything should flow. And when we were first presented the options for the opening party, it was okay, we're going to have, white tablecloths, this team's going to sit over here, this team's going to sit over here. For us as players, we were no, like yuck. Like that's exactly what it's like every time you walk into these things, you know? We were like, no, like we're gonna like set up these like, you know, everybody's gonna intermingle. Like it's gonna be this really like chill area, and like the flow is gonna feel like really natural. Like we're all part of like one community. And I think that set the stage for everything. Like,
Wow.
and we were able to stand up in front of, you know, all the players, all the staff, and tell them like why we're doing this, like as players, like what this means to us. And I think that just laid the foundation for everything. And then the format, it establishes the joy itself. It just does. It's the way that football is able to express, you know, is just something beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, we can never underestimate the impact of a good party. Like truly, especially in women's sports loves a good party. But Tobin, I do want to talk to you about this kind of player vision too, because one of the things that I think I kept thinking about as I was watching it was Unrivaled, or even TGL, the golf league, right? Of this idea of the format, you can kind of be in this other space and still like tied to the sport that you're coming from, but maybe present this other thing. And Unrivaled, like how much were you watching something like Unrivaled or something, another format like that, as you were thinking about, okay, what do we want World Sevens to be?
Yeah, the unique part about, like, you know, obviously being from the US is, you know, there's so much innovation happening in sport, so much innovation, and kind of amongst the players themselves, you know, whether they're current, whether they're former players. And we're seeing it be really successful, right? So I was really energized by the innovation happening in sports in the US. And obviously I had started with this project, and all these other things are popping up, and I was eager to learn from them, right? I went to the opening of Unrivaled. I was asking questions. I wanted to know what it felt like for the founding players, all of these things, because I knew I was going to be getting into it. The unique part was bringing this to a global scale, right? To a game that was not started in our country, and has a lot of tradition to it, and bringing that innovation to the traditional, you know, football. So that was kind of, I think, the uniqueness of this, which is why, you know, the players were so important to this, and the types of players that we brought on. Look, they're respectable in their careers, but I think utmost is like actually their relationships and the way that the players perceive them, not necessarily the way the media or the way, you know, they show up on like their Wikipedia pages, but like what the players feel and think about these players. That was a huge part of the integrity of this group, and putting our reputations on why we're doing this.
That makes a lot of sense. And I can imagine in your role specifically, as a player advisor, being able to sort of be that liaison between what you're experiencing with Unrivaled, being able to pour that back into this tournament while also centering the players, as you mentioned. I think that was really, really apparent, just in how much fun they were having and the way that they were able to express themselves. So hearing you sort of fill in the behind the scenes picture of that makes a lot of sense. Can you talk to us a little bit about moving forward now, Tobin? What does growth look like for this tournament? I know there are plans to have multiple tournaments a year, all culminating in like a Champions of Champions tournament. Obviously, scheduling is, you know, a big behemoth of a challenge to tackle. But how are you imagining growth after such an explosive introduction?
Yeah, I think it's funny because there's so much congestion, right? It's like so ugly. But I think at the end of the day, you know, and we did step on a lot of toes. Like there are people that aren't happy about this, you know, like there's traditional sense of like these big entities, right, that think they own football, and the idea of football. But I take it back to like, you go do it. You go innovate women's football. You go bring in investment in women's football, because these traditional competitions where women's football has always taken a backseat on men's football, they follow the same exact thing. Like this isn't helping women's football. Like it is remaining like very difficult. The P&Ls of these clubs are not pretty. And like if there's an opportunity to inject fuel, to inject capital into women's football in a new, innovative, fun way, like there's the schedules are going to clear, let me tell you, because we just set a prize pool. Bayern just went home from a 3-day fun kickabout with more money in their pockets than Arsenal did winning the Champions League in an extremely stressful match. So all I'm saying is, like, I hope that the governing bodies, these landlords of football, are taking note, because ultimately it's like, okay, then do something. Innovate, like, give to women's football. Like, right now it's just like stamping the women's side of a men's competition with way less money. Like, that doesn't sound like innovation to me, and that's not prioritizing women's football. So for me, I think it's almost like a provocation. Like, something, we're going to build it, and hopefully, in my mind, it's going to force innovation. And the beauty of the women's sporting landscape that we've seen is that it is the future of sports, and we're able to actually innovate on traditional sports in a way that men's sports only wish they could. And to kind of get to what you said about, like, what's next.
Yeah.
What's next is more competitions. I think that we want this to be a global event where you're seeing and meeting teams and players for the first time in a way like you've never seen it before in global football. I left World Sevens with new favorite players, understanding I didn't even know the Bayern's team. Like, I am
I did not expect that from
us
them.
all.
Dude,
I was
not
like,
expect
where
that
is
from
this
Bayern.
personality? Where was this flair before?
Right? Like, the
Biggest surprise of
storytelling,
the tournament.
the storytelling wrote itself. Like, I literally I'm so in love with that team. They are awesome. And I didn't even know before, right? So this is like the part of women's football that is so beautiful. Is like, let them write their own stories. I'm like a new fan of football from the event, which is ridiculous, because everybody knows, like, I'm a soccer junkie, I'm watching everything. So, yeah.
All right, Tobin, before we let you out of here, I do also want to talk about just in terms of like an audience, right? Because I do think what you've been saying about World Sevens and maybe how this opens up to another generation where they're not going to maybe sit through a 90-minute football game, right? And so, I mean, to your point, there's tension, right, between like the traditional side of football and then whatever World Sevens is and wants to be and wants to make up and throw things up against the wall and see what sticks. But how do you maybe balance that tension and just kind of be like, listen, we got to find new audiences. We got to find the next generation. We got to maybe go to them a little bit more. Are you excited by that part of the work too?
Yeah, I am really excited about it because I do think there is like an increasing gap that's happening between the current generation and the current format of football. I think that all things are meant to be innovated. And look, I'm not saying like change 11s. I think this can be complementary to 11s. I think what was really beneficial for me was coming off this tournament and then immediately going to watch the Champions League final. And no disrespect to the Champions League final, because it's the greatest competition probably in global football, in my opinion. But that was like night and day of an experience where, I like, you can't really see what's going on in the field. Like, I'm in the stadium, like, you're really far from it. It's like really long, not as many actions. Everyone looks exhausted on the field. Like, the difference between energy of like people are like on the ground, like just trying to get a breath. Like, they're exhausted. It's the end of the season. Like, the contrast between the two things was so crazy that I really appreciated it, because it showed how vastly different the two things are. And I loved both of them. I definitely loved Arsenal winning, so that made that way more fun. Else I probably would just be saying that I liked my experience as sevens. But it just showed for me why this is needed, because the way that the sevens worked is that it spoke to this current generation and of how they're watching things. It was made for social media. It was made to bring you on the field with these players. And look, I want to even produce it better and different. Like, this is the first iteration of it. But if you were there, you're on the field. It's almost like you're courtside at a basketball game. There's way more ways to monetize it. There's way more interactions. There's more personalization between you and the players, you and the teams. Like I told you, I got like a crash course on Bayern that now is my favorite team, you know? And now I'm like, if the German players carry that vibe into the Euros, I'm like now thinking Germany's gonna win the Euros. Like, that's like how tangible this felt. But like, I think everybody saw that the organic nature of this format was built for this age and what the way that they're interacting with sports and the way that they're interacting with sports personalities and teams. And this isn't anything we had to ask for. It just, like I said, was organically happening because of the players' experience and because of the format.
So many seeds planted just from this 3-day tournament, and so much to look forward to. I mean, growth in so many different directions. You know that the players who participated in this tournament, their DMs and inboxes are probably flooded from other players who probably are now curious and want to be involved for the next one, which is really all you can want from your first time doing anything. So congratulations, honestly. And we are so excited to see how this tournament continues to grow. And thank you for joining us. It was so great to hear your perspective.
Thank you. And I think the last thing I'll just say is that, like, players' voices really matter, and they can grow really awesome businesses. And I think that the biggest difference between this and any other thing that I've been a part of in football is, like, they led with the people that know it best.
Okay, we are now joined by our esteemed colleague from across the pond, Manchester United and women's football writer Charlotte Harpur. Charlotte, hello, welcome back from Portugal. How are you doing? Thanks for joining us today.
I'm really good, thanks, and pleasure to be here.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty of World Sevens football, can you just sort of set the scene for us and tell us what it was like to experience that on the ground? Because for those of us who are following on socials, it looked like such a party, like strong FOMO vibes, but let's hear it straight from the source.
It was a lot of fun, a lot of walkout discussions of whether they were going to build a human pyramid or do sports charades or... what else did they do? Skip with bibs. So I think the players really embraced the fun element. And interestingly, the two teams that got to the final, Bayern Munich and Manchester United, had definitely the most amount of fun. It was quick, it was fast-paced, there was loads of action, lots of goals. I think on the first day it felt a bit like lockdown football with the number of fans that had attended, but by Friday there was a real vibe, there was DJ music. So yeah, it was fun to watch, definitely, from my perspective.
Yeah, I think the fun really is the part that we are thinking about so much on this show, because I think the format maybe lends itself, no offside rule, right? There was this sense of attacking football, super prioritized, but there was maybe also this element of, made for TV in a way, maybe not TV necessarily, but streaming and watching at home and having that feel like, it's 30 minutes, you don't have to like be super invested. Do you feel like, what did the format, from your point of view, being there in person, offer that maybe makes it a different product from a full 11-on-11 game?
I think Tobin Heath mentioned this as well when we spoke to her, is that it's that inner child, that street football, the personality, that 7-on-7 is really like individual talent that's on show rather than a unit of 11 working together. Laetitia from United said that they tried a 2-2-2, conceded straight away, and they're like, right, scrap that. And you saw Caroline with her kind of jinga and her body movement as well. Some brilliant saves. Goalkeepers really came to the fore because there is so much action. And I think, again, 15 minutes, lots of goals, but not loads. It wasn't kind of a competitive landslide. And when I spoke to the fans, they loved it.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the, like, if I could best articulate the peak of the joy that I experienced vicariously, it was, this must be a taste of what we don't get to see day in and day out from these teams in training. When there are no cameras, there's no pressure of competition, they can hopefully access a little bit of that joy when it's just, you know, when they're amongst themselves. But now we get to see what that looks like. We get to see creativity that maybe you don't get a chance to display in real competition, which I thought was really cool and definitely touches on, Charlotte, what you said Tobin told you about getting back in touch with the whole point of all of this. But you did mention competition, and that's something else that, by the way, Charlotte wrote an incredible piece about all of this for The Athletic that I highly recommend, especially if you're still maybe or maybe not like me feeling a bit of FOMO. But one of the topics that you touched on in that piece, Charlotte, is about the competition. And I'm wondering if you can sort of talk about that, because there are huge ambitions for this tournament to keep growing, multiple tournaments a year, all culminating in a Champions of Champions tournament, ideally. How are the organizers sort of thinking about what it means to achieve competitive balance as they build toward that? Because, as you mentioned, so many top clubs competed in this inaugural one.
I think from the organisers' perspective, they want to invest in women's football and they see this as an opportunity. Adrian Jacob, who's head of football at World Sevens, was saying there is no rich women's football club. So putting money into the game is what is needed. You can't keep expecting clubs to, or UEFA and FIFA to suddenly splash the cash. And that's what they're doing, a $5 million prize pot, 2.5 million for the winners, Bayern Munich. That's 6 times what Arsenal won just from the Champions League final. And they don't see this as a disruptor or a competitor to the 11-a-side and the traditional product. But competitive balance is so important in women's football, especially because it's still a growth market. But we're already seeing massive rifts in the women's game. Look at kind of Barcelona in the Spanish league, Bayern Munich dominating in the German league, you know, PSG and Lyon in France. You only have 1 or 2. The WSL arguably is the most competitive of those European leagues. Well, definitely the most competitive, but still you've got Chelsea, who are streets ahead in terms of their operational costs. And so competitive balance is crucial because this is not a qualification process. It's hand-selected teams. So when do Brighton get an invite? When do Aston Villa get an invite? When do Tottenham Hotspur get invited to the party? And if not, then that gap is just going to become bigger and bigger.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Also, just because we think about, okay, the World Sevens organizers have said they want to have this be essentially a Grand Slam sort of thing. So are we going to see this in the U.S., right? Like, what teams are going to get invited there? You're going to have mostly NWSL, Canada, Mexico come to that party as well. You know, there is this real sense of, how does this play out against the larger landscape of women's football? And I think I do agree. Like, I'm still kind of deciding on, you know, are they or are they not a disruptor property? But the sense of, I do feel like there is some real tension from, and I hesitate to call this establishment football or anything, but there is a sense of, listen, we're all kind of going this way. Suddenly you're coming in and going this way. Do you see that tension? Do you feel like that tension is a good thing, a bad thing, a neutral thing, or just something that we have to kind of all figure out moving forward?
I think it's a wake-up call for UEFA and FIFA. You know, this wasn't just a kickabout. It wasn't a pre-season vibe. You know, these teams are going at each other, and fans loved seeing, you know, some of the best players, their favourite players. Pernilla Harder, 32-year-old, celebrating like she was a teenager again. They love seeing that in the flesh. Investment is crucial, definitely. And we've been crying out for some innovation in the women's game, so I'm hesitant to just critique it straight away. I think 2 key things for me are scheduling and player welfare. Because although we asked players, would you even travel to North America? They're like, yeah, absolutely, hands down. But if it's in November and December and calendars don't align, then that's tricky. And I think, to be honest, one injury would have undermined the whole tournament. Having said that, players said...
Totally.
Having said that, players said, we do this in training. It was perfect preparation. It helps keep me sharp for the Euros. And the other thing is financial sustainability. So Jennifer Mackesy has put in 100 million euros for that 5 years. But when those 5 years come about, what happens then? So those are my two niggles of why. What's the point of this?
Yeah, I hear the word startup used increasingly in women's soccer, and I feel like those niggles are, if a startup founder were in this interview, they would embrace that, and think, we'll build this as we go, which I think is for better or worse going to be the case with this tournament, given that it's just finished its inaugural event. But Charlotte, as always, super insightful contributions to this conversation. Before we let you go, though, not to pivot too drastically, but you have been at the top of the coverage of the very shocking news that PSG and now former Lionesses goalkeeper Mary Earps has announced her retirement from international football. Can you just give us a peek of how are things in England right now? What does this mean for the Lionesses 5 weeks out from the Euros? This is major, major news.
It came as a shock, I think, to the squad and all those involved. It seems that Mary Earps is not wanting to fulfill the role that Sarina Wiegman had planned for her during the Euros. I keep having to check myself that, okay, Mary Earps is not playing at the Euros, but she's not wearing an England shirt again. She's retired from international football for good at the age of 32, with plenty more running in the tank, especially as for her club. That's what she said in her statement. She said in her statement, it's time to, for future generations to step up. It's a huge disruption for the England squad, especially as 5 weeks out. Sarina Wiegman said in her statement she was disappointed. So, yeah, I going into a camp, knowing that you have those National League fixtures, and Mary Earps has attended the camp, said her goodbyes to her teammates, and left.
I mean, it's an Alyssa Nair speed run. It is. I mean, it is really interesting, though, in terms of, are you already getting a sense of what comes next, though, for Wiegman in terms of potential number 2 keeper? Because I think England is kind of in a similar position to where the U.S. women's national team has historically been, where there was not necessarily a clear succession plan on the depth chart, and people don't have a lot of caps right at the moment, right?
I think so. Hannah Hampton, is a definite strong number 1 in terms of her performance at Chelsea, and she has been preferred in the last camp where she played back-to-back games for England. So she has that quality there, but she doesn't have major tournament experience and that leadership that Mary Earps had. Wiegman has also Kiara Keating and Anna Morehouse in the squad as well, but they're not experienced players, especially on the international stage. Right. Ellie Roebuck is playing for Barcelona, but she hasn't been called up recently. So if Hampton were to get an injury, then it leaves England in an extremely vulnerable position.
Well, I have to say I did not have this particular kind of drama on my bingo card in the lead up to the Euros, but now that this has happened, I mean, I just need to buckle up now until July because who knows what more news we might get from any of these teams competing. Whew, which means hopefully we'll have an excuse to invite you back, Charlotte. Thank you so much for joining us. Meg, I have to say, leading into this World Sevens tournament, I had, with love, pretty low expectations of what it was going to be. There was just not a ton of marketing around it. As you and I know, there's always a million things going on. So things have to be major to sort of steal a headline, steal the spotlight. But now that we're on the other side of it, and certainly after speaking to Charlotte and Tobin, I'm just like, okay, in addition to what we actually saw, my expectations versus the reality, there's you could fit 5 soccer fields in between those things. How are you feeling about it now that all is said and done?
I definitely, like, it was way more fun than I anticipated. I do
Right.
think, talking about Unrivaled, talking about TGL, the golf league, whatever you want to call that, like, there is this, but like, Unrivaled to me is kind of now like the new standard in finding that space, that innovation space, and trying to figure out what can we do differently that stands aside from the true, like, OG product, and provide something different. And I think Tobin has talked about this at length of, the next generation is maybe not going to want to sit down and watch a 90-minute soccer game. So, like, what are other options in order to bring them into this space and then maybe eventually sell them on a 90-minute soccer game, right?
Yeah.
And so there is this real sense of, can you like kind of skirt around outside the lines and kind of pick at things and make stuff up, right? And that is fun. That is super fun. I mean, like, I had no rooting preference when I started watching on day one. And by day 3, I was like, if Bayern Munich do not win this tournament, I'm going to, like, burn Utica to the ground, right?
They won me over with the bicycle.
Like,
out.
I was just so ready
Straight
to root
up.
for them. And so, like, I do think, it felt a little 1.0, but I do think that they probably learned a whole bunch from what went on. I think they had some, like, based on Charlotte's reporting, it sounds like they had some game day experience issues, but also just logistically, this has to be a real project of trying to get a 3-day tournament going in Portugal ahead of Champions League. And so, yeah, I do think from a learning point of view, it was probably really instructive. I would very much want to go to a US version of this. And I can't say that about a lot of other things that, like, are kind of in this space. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I do think that if you had to choose between fun and vibes and, honestly, in this day and age, things that look amazing on social versus, like, a totally buttoned up, well organized from a logistical standpoint event, if it's your inaugural season, you have to go with the former because you can figure out the rest. And it's easier to figure out the rest once you've proven some of that proof of concept, get a little bit more money flowing in, have a longer runway of time in terms of planning. That can come later. But if you're not getting eyes on it from the beginning, that hill becomes a lot steeper to climb. And I sort of think about World Sevens in the same sort of, like, pot that I'm thinking of the NWSL, the skills challenge, which, like, again, huge potential. The last one that I attended, or not, maybe. I mean,
that, but that is such a good comparison, just because, or, like, the way that I think people have been fighting for an NWSL All-Star game for forever.
Yes, you heard my Freudian slip just now.
I know, like, but there is this sense of, like, how do you pull from away from the traditional 90-minute game and get into some of these less traditional spaces. But yeah,
totally.
Finish your thought on the skills challenge, because I'm curious to see
sure.
what I still remain unsold on the NWSL skills challenge. I'll just put it that way.
Fair.
I want it to be so much cooler than what it is.
I have to say, I was a little bit disappointed that Tech Ball, which featured in the very first one, did not get carried over into the second one, because I do think you need something that's a little more game-like, and they did have that with, like, the 1v1 sort of star formation. I forget what skill that was called. In Kansas City. But I'm not putting them in the same boat in terms of execution. I'm putting them in the same boat in terms of the potential for something. But I think in terms of making that first impression and making something that's unforgettable and that people are already going to be excited about in terms of the next ones, World Sevens takes the cake, which is kind of saying something because they did not have a lot of time to plan. I still am holding out hope for a skills challenge. I do think that having an all-star game during championship weekend in the NWSL will elevate a skills challenge. And I think it was so smart that World Sevens tacked itself onto the Champions League because people are already going to be in Portugal. You know how WOSO people are. They're going to find things to do.
We love an event.
We love
an event.
To curate a weekend, okay? Like, the way... That could be a whole other column because I'm obsessed with that. Just the way that you always see people at the same restaurants, the same bars. It's like we're all in the same Google Doc of planning an ideal weekend, which is so beautiful to me. Not to digress too much, but clearly the people organizing this tournament knew that, and they're like, why not gather people who are already going to be in town for this huge tournament for more fun? So I was beyond pleasantly surprised to see how much fun it turned out to be, and specifically how much fun the players had. I think that's a huge point that we can't
That's going to
overlook.
be the biggest selling point coming out of this, is just like all the content the teams got too, right? Like all the teams were leaning on that, but the players just looked like they were having a blast. And honestly, at the end of the day, like that's going to be the number, like they just got to blow up every single video, right?
Yeah.
Of teams like coming out, the music, everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a fun time.
It was so fun. And of course, to hear from Tobin and Charlotte, things that we might not have been able to see or read about as two people who were there just adds to it. Adds to the FOMO as well. But I can heal from it. And I think that's our show. We've covered as much as we possibly could. Make sure that you're following World Sevens because last I checked, they're still posting things from that very, very fun weekend. And there may be a couple more updates, who knows, as this tournament continues to grow. But don't worry, we got you covered. So does Yahoo Sports, because if you didn't know, The Athletic has partnered with them to provide free, best-in-class coverage of women's sports. The link is always going to be in the show notes. But if you want to jot it down, I guess, while I read it out loud, it's sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. Thank you for listening and learning a little bit more about World Sevens. We always want to hear from you. If you caught it, if you watched it live, if you didn't and just learned about it on the show, let us know what you think about the concept, where you would like to see one next, what teams you think need to be involved. We love to hear from you. You can hit us up fulltime@theathletic.com or any of our socials. Anywhere you scroll, we'll probably meet you there too. My name is Tamerra Griffin, and I am going to be enjoying this sun on Blue Sky and Instagram.
I'm Meg. You can also find me on Instagram and Blue Sky, and you'll probably see me at a Vermont Green game at some point this weekend if you're in Vermont with me.
Yes, after we start recording, Meg, I want to know more about the broccoli situation in Vermont. I'm very intrigued.
Okay.
This show is not possible without podcast producer Theo Lloyd Hughes, video producer Leah Griffin, and executive producer Emily Olson. Also, to be clear, they're good thoughts and good questions about the broccoli.
They are.
Yes, it looks delicious. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.